This podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Legend of the Bones. Following in the footsteps of giants, Legend of the Bones is a chimera. A mix of old-school tabletop RPG and dark fantasy storytelling. As its name might suggest, in Legend of the Bones the dice rule. There'll be no rerolls, no fudging the dice, no metacurrency. The roll of the bones will determine the character's destiny, and no one will be spared their fate. None shall escape the destiny of bone. Last time on Legend of the Bones. In the ancient shrine at Karak Ugal, Balin passed through the enchanted waterfall and into a chamber, where the spirit of his dead master, Amos ap Howin, manifested. Balin asked Amos about the Hellstones, and learned that the secret of how the hero, Derwin, defeated the tyrant warlord Vortigern lay in a place called Idis Mighton. Amos revealed that the Hellstones grew in power as they came together, but when Balin asked if the jewels could be destroyed, his master confirmed they could, but told Balin he must discover how on his own. However, Amos did explain that the Eye of Mordred, which had been in his keeping, was chief among the Hellstones, and that if it was destroyed, then the others would lose their power. Leaving the shrine, the companions gave Jenna a proper burial, before continuing on, stopping first in the village of Deliabol, and then on towards the settlement of Lost Wither. But en route, the companions spotted the body of a woman floating down the river, an arrow in her back. Suspecting a brigand attack, the companions hurried on, and shortly, as the village came into view, they found it ablaze, and many of the folk dead. Chapter 49, Part 1, Day 51, Afternoon. Party status: Beric, 43 out of 43 hit points. Lena, 31 out of 31 hit points. Valen, 19 out of 19 hit points. Talion, 24 out of 24 hit points. Canute, 31 out of 31 hit points. Spells available: Valen has memorized Push, Shield, Soothe, Revive, Clairvoyance, and Ignite. Talion has memorized Resolve, Poetic Prose, Pitch, and Imbue. Lena can pray for 2 first-level miracles, 2 second-level miracles, 1 third-level miracle, and 1 fourth-level miracle. The screams and shouts grew ever louder as the Uberdrache drew near to the burning village. What should have been a peaceful cluster of dwellings was now a scene of chaos and destruction. Flames licked hungrily at the wooden structures, sending plumes of black smoke spiralling into the grey sky. The fire's glow cast an eerie light upon the rain-soaked landscape, a stark contrast against the gloom. "We're too late," Beric muttered, his hand tightening around the hilt of his sword. Lena's eyes were wide with horror as she took in the devastation.
"Who would do such a thing?"
she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the flames and the patter of rain. "Outlaws," Beric replied grimly, his gaze scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. "They must have struck quickly, and without warning." The big warrior's face was stoic, but his mind was filled with the memory of the goblin attack which robbed him of hearth and home. "I will not let this stand," he vowed. The Uberdrache was drawing closer to the mooring quay, and the companions could see the villagers had given up trying to save their homes, and mistaking the new arrivals for more assailants, were now fleeing into the forest, their faces etched with fear and despair. Children clung to their parents, and the injured hobbled as fast as they could, seeking refuge from the inferno that had consumed their homes. Once moored, Canute ordered the crew to set about combating the fires, and they swiftly organised into a chain, passing buckets of water between them to quench the flames. It was heavy toil, yet no sooner as one fire was put out, another sprang into life. It was clear that through graft alone, they would not be able to save the village.
"It's no use,"
Beric declared, sweat beading down his soot-blackened face. Suddenly, Lena stepped out from the line and walked directly towards the nearest flaming building.
"Lena,"
Valen called in alarm. The cleric stopped and turned, her holy symbol clasped in her hands. She said something in reply, but it was impossible to hear her over the sound of the fire. She raised her head, and closing her eyes, she spoke again. After a few moments, Lena fell to her knees in humility, spreading her arms in surrendering supplication. No one spoke. All eyes were fixed on the cleric. She began to shake violently, her face contorted with either pleasure or pain, until her body became momentarily taut. At that precise moment, whether in response to Lena's prayer, or perhaps fortune was simply on their side, the sky grew darker still. There was a sudden flash, followed by the sharp crack and rumble of thunder, and a deluge of rain immediately began to fall like ropes. Such was the intensity of the flood, that in mere seconds everyone was soaked to their skin. The water pooled into great puddles on the ground, before forming into streams, which ran off into the river, and the burning buildings hissed and spat as the flames were quickly subdued, until all that was left were smouldering beams. And all the while, Lena remained on her knees, her lips imperceptibly moving in silent prayer. Then, as quickly as it had come, the rain ceased, and a break in the clouds allowed the sun's rays to bathe the village in golden light. Valen approached Lena. The cleric was shivering, though whether that was because she was wet through and cold, or because she had been in the presence of the divine, he knew not. She did not resist when he helped her to her feet, and wrapped his arms about her to share his warmth. Holding her shaking body close, he whispered in her ear,
"It is a miracle."
That dice roll you heard earlier was Lena successfully praying for cool rain. This is a 4th level homebrew miracle, in which the cleric asked their deity to provide just that. With the immediate danger past, it stands to reason that the surviving inhabitants of Lost Withel will quickly return, but it remains to be seen why the village was targeted. I am going to roll on the mythic event chart for a prompt. Action first. 21. Release. Now the subject. 51. Jealousy. Release jealousy. I think I'm going to let that percolate for a minute. Now, given his background, Beric will not wish to leave the settlement open to further attack, and I think that he would insist that the companions at least try to hunt down those responsible. However, I do not think Canute would be keen, given that in his own past he has been involved in violent raids. So I'm going to make a charisma check for Beric to see if he can convince his cousin. Given their familial bond, I am going to give Beric a +2 bonus, meaning the warrior needs to roll a 14 or less. A 4. Okay, so on that basis, I need to determine a few things, and for that, I will once again turn to the Oracle. Firstly, do the villagers have any idea who attacked them? A 6. That's a yes and. Was anything taken from the village? A 5. That's a straight yes. Okay, I'm starting to get an idea. Assuming the survivors will return, did any of the villagers see which direction the attackers went? A 4. That's a yes but. Okay, I'm going to interpret that as the answer being vague, based on the state of panic that people were in. Now, none of the characters are naturally skilled in tracking, but the people of Lost Withel make their living from the forest, so it makes sense that some of them would be. I think I'm going to make a reaction roll to see if the companions can convince one of the folk to help them track down the outlaws. Given the companions saved the village from being completely consumed by fire, I'm going to apply a +2 bonus. Here is the roll on 2d6. A modified 12. It doesn't get better than that. Chapter 49, Part 2, Day 51, Late Afternoon. Party status. The party status is unchanged, except that Lena can no longer pray for a 4th level miracle. The late afternoon sun glistened brightly off the pools and puddles as the companions searched with little hope among the burnt-out ruins of the buildings. Such had been the intensity of the inferno that the scorched and blackened timbers still gently smouldered long after the fires had been put out. The largest building to have been consumed by fire appeared to have been the village hall. Here they found the remains of at least a dozen people, though it would prove impossible to identify them, reduced as they were to bone. It was clear that there were no survivors to be found, only the haunting remnants of a life that had once been. Lena began to move between the dead, in turn giving a blessing and asking Naya to ease the passage of their souls. After, she looked to Valen. The mage was staring at one of the victims, his face impassive, yet the cleric knew well enough that inside he was in turmoil. Approaching him, Lena gently touched his arm. He did not look at her, and simply continued to gaze at the bones on the floor.
The evil that men do lives after them,
he lamented.
and the good, if there be any, is oft interred with their bones.
Lena slid her hand down to take his. She knew he was thinking of Amos, and that his melancholy was in fact grief resurfaced.
Despair not.
She comforted.
The dawn can feel distant in the darkness, but I am here to see you through the night.
Valen said nothing, but Lena felt him softly squeeze her hand. "Look here," Beric called as he hefted aside a fallen beam. Among the detritus was evidence of a hastily abandoned feast. Beric knelt beside a toppled table, his fingers brushing against a charred loaf of bread.
They were celebrating,
he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. Then picking up a posy of wilted flowers. A wedding, perhaps? Beric's heart hardened, and getting to his feet, resolve took root.
We must avenge them,
he declared. Canute shifted uncomfortably. It was not in his nature to feel pity for the weak, and through the years of voyaging with his father, his hands were stained with the blood of such raids. He was not ashamed, for this was the Skarne way, but perhaps he was beginning to learn something different from Beric on the nature of duty and honour.
It's not our business, cousin,
he rejected instinctively, though his tone was rueful, then added almost by way of an excuse.
And we have not the time to tarry.
Beric shot Canute a cold stare, saying nothing for a moment, though his expression quickly softened, and he put a hand on Canute's shoulder.
Conran told Kier that a man's past may haunt him, but it is his future that can define him.
He looked appealingly at his cousin.
Surely that could be true of all men.
Canute considered these words. Perhaps Beric was referring to his own failure to protect and avenge his kin, rather than passing judgment. Either way, he took no offence. He had quickly learnt that Beric was a man of principle, and Canute admired that. He smiled grimly.
Aye, there is truth in that.
The companion's attention was drawn, as those folk who had fled slowly began to return. Many were injured or traumatized by the indiscriminate killing of family and friends, and Lena went quickly with Valen to offer comfort and healing where they could. As they tended the wounded, the others continued their search for survivors among the fallen, but found none. The villagers who had returned unharmed began to gather around, their faces etched with grief and fear. Among them stood a rugged man, perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s. His clothes were torn, and his face smeared with ash, and his countenance bore the same trauma of the day's events. Nonetheless, his sharp eyes scanned the newcomers with a mix of interest and suspicion. The man approached. He was cautious but not afraid.
"You're not from these parts. Who are you?"
He challenged. Beric looked the man in the eye, understanding his wariness.
I am Beric. This is Canute and Talion. Our friends there are Lena and Valen. We are travelling upriver to Varfell, and came upon your village after the attack. What's your name, friend?
The man nodded, his eyes softening slightly as Lena and Valen came to join them.
"Ehbron.
Then speaking to Lena, he said,
I saw what you did. You saved our homes."
Lena inclined her head modestly, her voice gentle.
It was the will of the Nine, but we are here to help, in any way we can.
I know little of that. Folk round here in Lostwithal, we mostly follow the old ways.
Ehbron glanced pointedly at Valen, then looked beyond to the Uvadraka's crew, who were busy clearing the debris, before turning his attention back to the companions.
You and your men seem no strangers to a fight,
he observed.
Aye,
Beric confirmed.
and we would deal with these outlaws, but we know not this forest. Could one of your folk track them?
Upon hearing these newcomers' intent, Ehbron's demeanour became less cautious.
I can help you, and I need your help in return.
How can we help?
Lena asked eagerly. Ehbron's face hardened, his voice filled with a mix of anger and sorrow.
My sister, Morwenna. She was to marry today. The outlaws killed her betrothed, Joran, and then took her. But not before putting our village to the torch.
Mithra's mercy!
Lena exclaimed.
Why would they do such a thing?
They appeared here in the area a few weeks ago. I know not from where. At first, they'd come and buy food and supplies, but soon after, they started demanding things for no coin.
Ehbron's face was bitter.
More recently, their leader Ruskalin, he took an interest in my Morwenna. He tried to get her to leave with him. She refused, of course. Told him she was betrothed to another. That was a week ago.
Ehbron wrung his hands together, his distress plain to see.
Gods know what that villain's done to her.
Then we must act swiftly.
Beric commanded decisively.
We cannot afford to wait.
So with time of the essence, and the companions wishing to leave immediately, there are a few things I need to take into consideration. Firstly, I'm going to rule that Lena has used her 2 first-level miracles to heal some of the wounded villagers. Likewise, I'm going to rule that Valen has already cast Soothe for the same reason. I'm also going to rule that Ehbron will be aware that there are D6 plus 6 outlaws. So let's roll that now. 9. Okay, and to be clear, this is the number that Ehbron is aware of. There may well be more wherever the group is hiding. Whilst Canute has agreed to pursue the outlaws, I do not think that he would want to risk losing members of his crew seeking vengeance for a village he cares nothing about. So on that basis, I think he would choose to bring Arn and just one other crew member. Since his last appearance, Arn has reached level 4 and now has 24 hit points. The other crew member I'm going to call Kettle. He is a 2nd level fighter with 12 hit points. Ehbron himself is a 3rd level ranger. Now, the Advanced Rules for Old School Essentials does a good job at porting the AD&D Ranger class to BX, but I have never liked the way that Rangers in Dungeons & Dragons have access to spells. So I have made my own custom version of the class, which you can find at legendofthebones.blogspot.com. I will also roll Ehbron's stats off mic. However, as a 3rd level ranger, Ehbron has a base 40% chance of tracking in the wilderness. He also gets a 2% bonus for each creature beyond the 1st, and I'm also going to award an additional 10% bonus for the ground being soft under the recent rain. Finally, sunset at this latitude and at this time of the year is around 8 PM, so with 3 hours of daylight left, I will apply a penalty of 10% to account for the light beginning to fade. All in all, that means that Ehbron will need to roll a 48 or less on percentile dice. A 38. Finally, I think it makes sense to roll a wandering encounter. A 4, so no encounter. Okay, let's find out what happens. Chapter 49, Part 3, Day 51, Early Evening. Party status: Beric, 43 out of 43 hit points. Lena, 31 out of 31 hit points. Valen, 19 out of 19 hit points. Talion, 24 out of 24 hit points. Canute, 31 out of 31 hit points. Arn, 24 out of 24 hit points. Kettle, 12 out of 12 hit points. Ehbron, 21 out of 21 hit points. Spells available: Valen has memorized Push, Shield, Revive, Clairvoyance, and Ignite. Talion has memorized Resolve, Poetic Prose, Pitch, and Imbue. Lena can pray for 2 2nd level miracles and 1 3rd level miracle. Time was fleeting, and the light was fading fast as the company moved swiftly through the dense brush. Their haste was a calculated risk, for their lack of stealth could have easily attracted unwanted attention. Yet, if the outlaws could kill indiscriminately to kidnap a woman, who knew what other heinous acts they were capable of? Morwenna was in grave peril. It had been easy enough for Ehbron to pick up the outlaws' tracks, coming as they had on horseback, and as such, for the most part being forced to use well-trodden paths. The woodsman explained that on this eastern side of the River Nade, the forest was known as Cws Gwyrth, and that local legend told that it was protected by a forest guardian, who was half man and half beast. In our homeland, we too have legends of such a spirit. He is known as Iconiog Din, the Horned Man. Talion responded on hearing this. It is said that travellers in his realm would do well to respect the forest, for his wrath at those who violate his domain knows no bounds. They continued travelling eastward for more than 2 hours. Under the thick boughs of the wood, only the faintest light from the waxing gibbous moon reached the forest floor, casting eerie shadows and hampering their progress. Rather than risk the conspicuousness of a torch, Talion produced the enchanted moonstone to light their way. The jewel's soft, ethereal glow illuminated the path, casting a silvery sheen on the leaves and branches around them. Shortly, as the first stars appeared through the canopy, the path wound south, leading the company to the edge of a clearing. There, some 70 feet away, stood the dilapidated ruin of a wooden building. It was large, perhaps 60 feet wide, and might have once have had more than one level. However, weather and time had reduced it to little more than a broken shell, overgrown with ivy and brambles. The wooden beams, now splintered and rotting, jutted out at odd angles, giving the structure a skeletal appearance. Behind it, the forest rose on an incline, and somewhere nearby to the west, the quiet burbling of a stream could be heard.
What is this place?
Beric asked in barely more than a whisper. Ehbron shook his head, indicating that he had no explanation.
Probably an old hunting lodge.
Canute offered, in an equally low voice, his eyes scanning the ruins for any sign of life. Somewhere from within the structure, some horses nickered, their sounds announcing someone's presence. Talion quickly covered the moonstone, lest its light give them away, plunging them back into near darkness. Presently, a figure appeared. Little could be seen of him in the moon's soft glow, but from his gait it was clearly a man. He moved outside the structure, and loosening his breeches, began to urinate unceremoniously on the ground. The sound of his stream hitting the earth was loud in the stillness of the night. Talion drew an arrow from his quiver and knocked it to his bowstring, his eyes narrowing in concentration. Beric put his arm out and shook his head, indicating that the bard should not shoot. The warrior knew that one false move and their presence would be known. Those horses clearly belonged to the outlaws, which seemed odd. Such beasts were beyond the means of ordinary folk, let alone a band of fugitives. A thought flickered across his mind that there was more here than met the eye. His immediate concern, however, was the whereabouts of the other outlaws. There was no visible light source coming from the ruins, so where were they? He suddenly wished that Keir were there, for if ever they needed the rose lightness afoot, it was now.
We need to take him alive,
he whispered, looking over his shoulder at the others. But something was wrong.
Where's Ehbron?
He hissed, his voice barely audible. The companions looked at each other. No one had noticed the woodsman slip away.
There!
Lena pointed to the western side of the clearing, where creeping from the undergrowth, towards the urinating man, was Ehbron. Thank you for listening to Legend of the Bones. I hope you've enjoyed the show. If you like what you've heard, then please consider rating and reviewing the show in your podcatcher of choice. Not only do I love seeing the feedback, but it really does help the show reach new listeners. As always, where would I be without my amazing cast of voice talent? Returning to the show in his third character, this time playing Ehbron, is my good friend Jim Hurst. Jim is a hugely talented musician who has collaborated with me on Talion's songs featured in this season. Also returning is another good friend, and playing once again the role of Canute is Jon Cohen, creator of Tale of the Manticore. My sincere thanks to you both. I am ever grateful. I'll put Jim and Jon's links in the show notes. You can also help by liking or reposting new episode announcements, or by recommending the show online or to a friend. You really can't beat the power of word of mouth. Alternatively, if you'd like to show your appreciation by buying me a metaphorical cup of tea, then I have a Ko-fi page at ko-fi.com/Legend of the Bones. Any donations will go towards the show's running costs. If you're interested, I have a range of merchandise, which can be found at www.redbubble.com/people/legendbones/shop. To keep the cost down to you, all items are presented at zero markup. I make no money from them. It's purely to give something back to fans of the show. I would also love to know what you think of the show, and I do respond to every message I receive. So with that in mind, you can contact me on X at LegendBones, Blue Sky at LegendBones, Mastodon at LegendBones, at ttrpg-hangout.social, Instagram at LegendOfTheBones, email at legendofthebones@gmail.com, or go to legendofthebones.blogspot.com for show notes, house rules, character profiles, art, maps and more. Join me next time to find out what awaits our adventurers as the bones decide their fate. None shall escape the destiny of Bone.
I'd like you to join me on a journey into danger and mystery. Are you looking for an action and intrigue-packed solo RPG podcast? One that tells a compelling story and then pulls back the curtain. The Lone Adventurer is split 50-50. Half is a dramatic audiobook-style story set in a dark fantasy magitech world, and half is a step-by-step guide. A guide to how the drama has been created, how solo RPGs work, and how you can create solo adventures of your own. M. Guns gave this review. I have listened to a few different iterations of fantasy storytelling, and this one rates at the top along with Me, Myself and I. And Mr. Pizzle had this to say: Carl has really knocked it out of the park with this one. Amazing production and pulls you into the story right off the bat. You can find The Lone Adventurer on the podcatcher of your choice, on YouTube or at theloneadventurer.podbean.com. The adventure is just getting started. I hope you'll join me.